Hi there, my name is Jeffrey Reed. I work with Lifeway in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a kids ministry specialist, and so over the last 20, 25 years of ministry, I've spent a good bit of that time in family ministry and kids ministry in particular. And this topic I've wrestled with a lot, and I hope it's a helpful tool for you. This tool is especially helpful if you've, two things that are opposites. If you've been doing it for a long time, you've been teaching kids for a long time, teaching Sunday school for a long time, maybe even a couple generations, or if you're new, because you're kind of in the middle. People in the middle tend to not struggle with it as much because they don't know about the history of how Sunday school or how teaching kids in small groups is, or even in large group time. And so they just kind of go with what they know is best. The new people are really nervous about what to do. So this is a helpful workshop for those on both ends of the spectrum. And it might reinforce, if you're in the middle of that, you've been doing it for maybe 5 or 10 years, or you're in your 30s, like me, wink, wink. You might just be, hey, I'm good with what I got. But this is a helpful tool to help people figure out what is appropriate to teach kids when it comes to a Bible story. So this could be music, this could be graphics, this could be video, but we're going to focus primarily on illustrations, on Bible teaching pictures, because that's the most common thing we use. We see that in small groups when we have our missionaries that go to other countries where there's no technology and they can't use a screen or a video. In the old days, they used to use a felt board and do the stories on a felt board. Now our digital screens are basically the equivalent of felt board. And many times they use pictures. They take pictures with them and show pictures. And so I want to talk about the topic, and we'll focus on pictures, but you have to understand it does apply to other things. And so we want to talk about what is appropriate to show kids as far as illustrations go, or how to teach kids in your Bible story. What is appropriate to say and do. And so what I did is we've set up this quadrant. This is sort of an assessment quadrant. We see this all over the place. We see this in areas of business when they're trying to be both profitable, a good value for the customer, but profitable for the business. So you want to have a good value for the customer up here, and you want to be profitable as a business over here. And so this is the best quadrant to live in. We're going to look at 2 areas of assessment. When you're teaching kids, very often we say things like, and I experienced this when I first came to Lifeway, we did some graphic changes to one of our curriculum lines, and it upset a lot of people because we changed the Bible story pictures. Honestly, we changed pictures that had been being used for years and years, and we did what we thought were really cool translations of those. But we got letters, those are inappropriate for kids, and we had to interpret what that inappropriate means. And it was really, there were several lenses that it was called inappropriate by, the lens of cultural relevance, the generational lens, the accuracy lens. And so we want to break this down so that going forward, when you select pictures to show kids or songs or videos, you can use this grid as an assessment. And so there's 2 primary lines that we're going to look at. The first is appropriateness, and I'll make this the appropriate grid right here. So this is this appropriate for kids? Now there are several ways that we call something appropriate. For example, a minor, what would be considered a minor cuss word now, 40 years ago was majorly taboo, like highly inappropriate. Now it would be so normal that many would say it's appropriate. Definitely the way that we've dressed over the centuries has changed depending on the era of time and what was revealed, how much skin was shown, would change the appropriateness. We got to be careful here because this is the lens that shifts, that has led to sort of this discussion on what is appropriate. We'll talk about accuracy next, which is really easier. But this is the tough one because we look at things that are appropriate through our own experience. If you grew up in a very conservative environment, home or community, I go to some parts of the country where they're very hyper-conservative, even up north. And then I was in New York recently, and I heard every word in the book as I was walking down the street and saw a lot of stuff that most people outside of those urban environments wouldn't see. So appropriateness is a word that often shifts. And here's a prime example, speaking of New York. Prior to 9/11 and prior to the 90s when we started having terrorist attacks kind of come home, you would not have had the discussion of evil in the world as much with kids back then as you do now. We never would have talked about terrorism with children, and so we kind of have to now. It's in front of us. A lot of kids, we had to explain to them why people would feel so compelled to murder 3,000 people in New York City. And we might not even use the word murder, generations ago. And definitely with the with influx of pornography, we have to talk about things at a much younger and younger age. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics with you on any of this because you live in your church and your culture, but you need to be aware that you will look at things through your lens. And so I encourage you to step back and look at things through a bigger lens, because you might have children in your midst that know more about things than you even know. And so you just need to make a decision for what's best for your children that you're teaching, and don't let even an organization like us dictate to you what those specifics are. I'm only giving you a tool that you can use to help assess that. And so let's jump into it. So here's appropriateness. So down here on the bottom end of this scale, we would basically have things that are inappropriate. And here's what I'm going to do in just a minute. I'm actually going to show you specific pictures, and we'll assess them and put them on this grid. So here is inappropriate. This is stuff down here. Like, I would show, if I was going to tell kids about Jesus dying on the cross, I would not use these are true details, true facts about what a crucifixion is to a preschooler or a kindergartner. Probably not even a first or second grader. I would probably say it was very bloody and painful, and that Jesus died on the cross. He did die. He didn't just pay the price for our sins. He did it by dying for us. So the specifics of that have changed. That phrase right there, Jesus died on the cross, would have been real uncomfortable for Sunday school teachers, and probably up until the 60s and 70s, to say, even though it's the truth, it's an appropriate thing. Was it appropriate to say, well, now, and kids know what death is at a younger age. That's unfortunate, but evil and sin is in the world. It's a fractured universe. And so that is kind of where a story might fit, or what details you might include as shifted. So down here is inappropriate. Up here is appropriate. And you know what Sunday school teachers like to do? We like to just play it safe and stay up here all the time. If I was going to err, I would rather err up here than down here. I recall once when I was a teacher in my hometown, and I was teaching my preschoolers, and I was doing sound effects. It was a music class, so we were using our ears and learning to hear things. And so I was playing these sound effects, and I had a whole bunch of them on a CD player. I was pushing play, pause, and it's like birds, kitty cat, dog, and I had one that was like, I don't remember what track it was, but it started playing, and it sounded like somebody walking in the jungle. Then it got louder, and then there was this giant T-Rex roar, and oh my goodness, I should have skipped that one, because I realized these preschoolers are hearing this. It was a great sound system. They had this giant roar, and I looked down as many of my preschoolers kind of recoiled in terror. At that point, I had to tell a lot of parents what I had done. That was inappropriate. I should have aired way up here on the side of appropriate. So here is our scale for the appropriateness of something: inappropriate or appropriate. Sometimes we feel like Bible stories will fit in this grid. For example, and even though they're very important Bible stories, we probably would put them down here. Like, for example, many would say that Cain, murdering his brother, is an inappropriate story to say, because it involves murder, it involves brutal murder in the first generation. So some teachers would put it down here. But if you're trying to unpack the picture of God and how early sin infiltrated humanity, it might be really important to your storyline, and so you might want to put it up here. Again, you have to determine that. I'll give you several other examples. David sleeping with Bathsheba, a major story in Scripture, but how do you unpack that? Kids, Potiphar's wife and David. There's so many stories of murder. There's more bad stories in Scripture that we have to avoid than good ones that we can tell. And so the problem is, if you just do the good ones, your kids are going to miss out on the whole story, and that the world is full of sin, and that we need a Savior to save us. And so you have to assess where you put those stories in there. And there are ways to say things. I think we did David and Bathsheba. We didn't unpack any details, except that we said, I think when I taught kids this year, Bathsheba was one of David's best friend's wife, and he wasn't supposed to be alone with her, and he was. And that's the truth of the story. We didn't go into details, but we shared out he just kind of crossed the line in a big way. And then he murders her husband, and so we did talk about that. He killed him later, because he just didn't want to get caught. Sometimes. So this is the line that shifts. It shifts through culture. It shifts from generation. As you get older, you're like, man, you got to be careful too, because you're not just dealing with what's appropriate for kids. You're going to get called out by your parents. Like, did you talk to my kid about this? And we're always really sensitive to that. So I will say this, don't avoid those stories if you feel like you're going to get those conversations. Talk to parents in advance and tell them what you're going to tell their kids, and then they can decide in advance, and you're not going to get the pushback later on. But I feel if as much as the scriptures that you can unpack, even if sometimes they live down here, do it. There are lines, of course. We're not going to spend 13 weeks unpacking a Song of Solomon for kids. That would be inappropriate. But we will spend time talking about sin and death and destruction and the goodness of God and what he did for us. So, okay, I'm going to move real quickly to the other one because this is important too. Accuracy. Is it accurate? Now, this seems pretty cut and dry, but you'd be amazed in our desire to make stories relevant to children. Sometimes we do things like we sensationalize them. We make them bigger than they were. We might add characters or do silly things, and we tell stories all the time. When we tell Bible stories, we want to tell it in a creative way. We want to communicate it in a creative way. But sometimes we will lose and sacrifice accuracy, so you have to be really careful here. So in this realm, we've got your accurate, which is over here, and your inaccurate, which is over here. And so, where do we want to live? If you could draw a line right through here, this grid means the stories are inappropriate and inaccurate. What's the point of doing a story that's inappropriate for kids if it's also inaccurate? We really want to live over here where the stories are really accurate or as close to scripture as we can get. And up here, we want them to be appropriate. So this grid is avoid at all costs. This one's kind of weak, but it's appropriate. Sometimes we cause problems down the road if we tell stories inaccurately. It might be really appropriate for kids, but when we add characters to a Bible story that weren't there, or tell them in a silly way, or make the characters cartoonish in a sense, and I'm not against that either because I like illustrations that are cartoons sometimes, but we can't sacrifice accuracy. I'd say, man, this one's not great. This one is probably where some people live that are willing to tell all the guts and gore of the story and be accurate about it, but it's not inappropriate. This is the sweet spot, and you've got to figure out where stories fit in this grid. And I would try to live here where it's appropriate for kids and accurate for kids. And sometimes you feel like you need to sacrifice. I would stay here as much as possible. I would live up here. Now, again, you're never going to be fully accurate. You can't be because we're not speaking in Hebrew. We didn't have cameras back then, so there's no illustration, no picture, no video that you can show that's 100% accurate. The only way you could do that is if we had a video of Jesus teaching or a video of David and Goliath. And if we did, it would only be two-dimensional, so it still wouldn't be 100% accurate. But you can live in this zone over here. You can be more accurate than not. So let's real quickly, because I've only got a couple minutes for you guys. I hope this is helpful. I'd love your feedback, too, on whether you think it is. Here's some pictures. I'm going to go through these really quick. These are all different illustrations of David and Goliath. Just one story, multiple illustrations. So here's one. Look at that. Really kind of modernized. It looks like he's wearing a Tron space outfit or something. We got David there. We see how tall Goliath is. It's on the plane. It's really this cool cartoonish superhero version of David and Goliath. So it's really, it'd be appropriate and cool for middle schoolers, but highly inaccurate, so much so that it almost, this sensationalizes it. It makes it really silly. There's nothing accurate about the dress. It's just, so if I were going to pick a place, I mean, it's appropriate for kids, kind of. It'd probably be up here. It's highly inaccurate. Like it'd be over here probably. That's where I'd put it. Just my assessment. Again, okay, I'm gonna go through these in no particular order. Okay, this one is kind of one of those pictures you see in the blue Bible in the doctor's office or in the dentist's office where the sky is always blue and everybody looks like they're from Ohio instead of the Middle East, which is where most of them were from. So that's David and Goliath. So I kind of like this one because it does show you sort of how tall he was. David looks like he's about 5 foot. Goliath looked like he's about 10 foot. The garb is accurate. It doesn't show any of the forces on either side. The topography is accurate. So this is kind of cool. It looks very, like I'd say from an accuracy standpoint, they're pretty close. And you can't ever be 100%. But I put this over here on the accurate range. Appropriate for kids? Yeah, I think so. I think that's appropriate for kids. Now you got to consider this. If you grew up in the 60s and 70s and you saw this is your view of Bible stories, you might think this is old school. And it might be in that sense, but it's not inaccurate, and it's definitely appropriate. So you might want to go a little more relevant to kids, and again, that's the lens you look through, but I definitely would put this up here in this quadrant. Here's one that is this is an old etching. It's actually an engraving that was done a couple hundred years ago, I believe, and it's right after the hit. It shows David looking like he's in his 20s, so it's actually kind of inaccurate. And the garb looks true for both of them. That's what they would have worn. But it looks like it's for adults. This is inappropriate for kids. Not because it shows anything salacious, but it's not an illustration for kids. It's black and white. Kids would look at that for 5 seconds and be bored, whereas they could look at the other ones that I showed you and be a little more intrigued. So I'd say on this one, it is slightly, it's probably inappropriate from a cultural standpoint, but pretty accurate. So it'd probably be over here on the accurate scale, but not so. I'll probably put it in the lower part of this quadrant. I'd be okay with that picture. Here's one. That's a great one. That was good. It's awesome because it's cartoon. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just boring. So from a boring standpoint, I'd say it's fine. It's appropriate. It's definitely, it's not accurate because it's a cartoon, but it's not bad. I mean, it's a cartoon, and kids like cartoons. And that's another thing. We feel like, well, it's a cartoon. We can't show them comics or illustrations. Man, if they're engaging the story, as they get older, they're going to stop looking at cartoons, but still look at the story. So don't be afraid to use cartoons for younger kids or coloring pages or things like that. You can't make a black and white line illustration 100% accurate, or even 90. It's a cartoon, but it does show the anger of these two, his determination. There's some cool things about it. I wouldn't give it like really high ratings, but it's probably here. I kind of like this one, except that I doubt they had a stare down like this. This is an artist rendition of it. Really like that a lot. I do. I like that. It's probably one of my favorite ones, but I doubt they got in a stare down like that. And also, if Goliath were to stand up, he'd be 20 feet tall instead of just 9 or 10. This is way inaccurate. But it's kind of cool for kids. Again, black and white. So it's, I'd probably say from an accuracy standpoint, it's even further over here. It's kind of appropriate, but we're gonna live in this grid. This one, I'm gonna give you 3 more. So I'm gonna be done in just a sec. So check this one out. It's funny, but it kind of makes the story silly. Like he gets hit and his eyes go beep, 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 which is kind of, it's all right. It's cute. It's a cartoon. The kids will like it. They see a little kid facing a giant, drops his spear, he bonks him in the head. It's fairly accurate. It's okay. It's good. I'm not gonna knock it down. It's appropriate. I probably put it over here somewhere. You can tell I'm being random. Okay, here's one. This one is highly sensationalized, highly inaccurate, and highly inappropriate. But a lot of leaders, unfortunately, would use this. I'm gonna show it's a graphic novel illustration. It's pretty violent looking. It's really what you'd see in a dark comic. That was definitely a sensationalized story of David and Goliath. So it has it's not accurate in nearly any way, but it is this artist's interpretation of the story. But it's also highly inappropriate for kids. I'd say if I was a college student or young adult, look at that's pretty cool, but I would be like, that's not what the story was like anyway. So it's like way down here in this quadrant. I would never use stuff like that in kids ministry. Here's one that I like because it's kind of accurate. This is from the Gospel Project this past year. It shows David. It's accurate in almost every way, except that it's a cartoon illustration. But again, that's kind of the nature and the branding of the Gospel Project. And a lot of producers and publishers, they have their curriculum is branded, and so a lot of it fits together. So that one is this is one of my favorites. Of course, I love the story behind it. It's not about David being this awesome kid, because we know later on he falls. It's about God coming through for his people. And so I like that story a lot. I put it up here. So I know I've gone over time, but I think it's a really important tool for you guys to utilize, for you to feel comfortable with what you teach. If you feel like something is down here, just avoid it altogether. Try to live minimally in these zones, but this is the sweet spot right here where you find that your stories, that your illustrations are both appropriate and accurate as possible as we can get. So I hope you guys have a great time. Thank you so much for serving kids and for putting your time in with them. I love you for that. You're going to have a reward in heaven for that, and hopefully rewards on earth as you see kids come to know Jesus.